I was standing at my husband's funeral. A closed casket. Black umbrellas pressed together like a single dark shape. Rain tapping softly on the lid, steady and patient. Then I saw him. My dead husband alive, standing at the edge of the crowd just beyond the last row of chairs. His coat was darker than I remembered. His hair combed the way I liked it. He didn't wave. He didn't say my name. He only looked straight at me and slowly put one finger to his lips. Be quiet. My knees weakened, but I stayed upright, gripping the damp handle of my umbrella. Before I could take another breath, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. Unknown number. One word on the screen run. A minute later, another message arrived. They're watching you. My hand slipped into my pocket, searching for the tissue I'd been folding and unfolding all morning. Instead, my fingers touched stiff paper. A bank notice. I hadn't put it there, someone else had. $184,600 withdrawn from our joint account. The date was yesterday. The signature at the bottom was mine. I stared at that shaky imitation of my name while the minister spoke of love and endings. Rain soaked through my sleeves. My heart didn't race. It went very still. How could they do this to me? If you want to hear my full story, subscribe to the channel and listen until the end. My name is Caroline Miller. I was 54 years old when I buried my husband for the first time. I had always been the woman who kept things from falling apart. Not loudly, not with praise or recognition, but quietly, the way a house stays standing because someone checks the foundation when no one is watching. I paid the bills early. I kept copies of documents in labeled folders. I knew which light flickered when the washing machine ran and which floorboard creaked near the hallway door. I liked knowing where things were. It made me feel safe. People used to say I was dependable. What they really meant was that I didn't ask for help. I didn't make problems visible. If something was wrong, I adjusted myself until it wasn't noticeable anymore. That habit followed me into my marriage. My husband was a lawyer. Respected. Calm. The kind of man people listen to without raising his voice. At dinners, he carved the roast carefully, wiped the knife before setting it down. He believed in procedure, in doing things properly. I trusted that about him. I trusted that he knew how to keep danger at a distance. Our life looked orderly from the outside. A neat house. Holidays on schedule. Family photos aligned in matching frames. My daughter grown and married. No obvious fractures. I thought that meant we had done something right. I handled the household finances, but I never questioned his work. That was his territory. His files stayed in his office. His calls ended when I walked into the room. Not because he hid things, I told myself, but because he was considerate. Professional. I also trusted his family. His sister had always been polite, efficient, the sort of woman who arrived early and left on time. My son-in-law came into our lives with confidence and warmth, always offering to take things off our plate. I mistook that eagerness for care. There were moments, small ones, that didn't sit quite right. A document already signed when I was asked to review it. A conversation redirected when I asked a simple question. Someone answering my phone, so I wouldn't have to. Each time I let it go. I told myself grief, stress, or age made me suspicious. I believed loyalty was a form of protection. That if I trusted people, they would be worthy of it. The days before the accident were painfully ordinary. Coffee in the same blue mugs. The smell of clean laundry. His keys placed in the bowl by the door. No raised voices. No warnings I couldn't ignore. That is why the funeral felt unreal. Standing there under black umbrellas, listening to words about endings, I realized how much of my life had been built on assumptions. Not facts. Not proof. Assumptions. I had trusted the story I was given. I had trusted the people closest to me. And I was about to learn how expensive that trust had been. A few days before the accident, my husband said something that didn't belong to the moment, and because it didn't belong, I tried to make it smaller than it was. We were in the kitchen, early evening, the safest hour of the day. The dishwasher was humming, finishing its cycle. The window above the sink was cracked open, letting in the smell of freshly cut grass and warm pavement. I was drying plates, stacking them carefully, one against the other, the way I always did. He stood across from me, leaning against the counter, watching me without saying anything for a long moment. "If anything happens to me," he said finally, Don't trust anyone close to us. I smiled without thinking. Not a real smile, more a reflex. The kind you use to smooth over discomfort. What kind of thing is that to say? I asked. You're fine. He didn't smile back. He straightened, folded his hands once, then unfolded them. That movement caught my attention more than the words. He was a careful man, but he was never restless. Now he looked like someone choosing each breath on purpose. I need you to listen to me, he said. If something goes wrong, people will come to you fast. They'll sound reasonable. They'll say they're helping. Don't sign anything. Don't give anyone access. Promise me. The plate slipped slightly in my hands, clinking against the counter. The sound felt too loud. I remember noticing the blue mug by the sink, still stained faintly from his coffee, the handle turned toward him out of habit. You're talking like you expect something to happen, I said. I kept my voice light. I had spent most of my life learning how to keep conversations from becoming dangerous. He looked tired then. Not physically, something deeper. I'm talking like someone who knows how people behave when money is involved. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to press him, to demand clarity. Instead, I told him he was overthinking, that stress from work was getting to him. I told him everything was fine because I needed it to be true. He stepped closer and kissed my forehead, lingering longer than usual. Just promise me, he said again. I promise, I replied, though I didn't understand what I was agreeing to. The accident happened 3 days later. After the funeral, that conversation returned to me with relentless precision. It replayed while I lay awake at night, staring at the slow rotation of the ceiling fan. It surfaced when people spoke to me in softened voices, when decisions were made around me instead of with me. Each time, his words sounded less strange and more exact. I began noticing details I had once ignored. The locked drawer in his home office, the one he'd never mentioned. The extra phone I found in his coat pocket after the police returned his belongings. Its battery drained completely. The way his sister arrived at my house within an hour of the accident, already carrying a folder thick with documents. Grief sharpened my memory instead of dulling it. Moments rearranged themselves, forming a pattern I couldn't escape. I remembered how he'd cleared his desk the week before, bringing boxes home and saying only that he preferred to work there for a while. I remembered a calendar entry erased so thoroughly it left a faint gray shadow behind. When I found the bank notice in my coat pocket at the funeral, something inside me finally locked into place. His warning was no longer abstract. It was specific, directed, meant for this moment. I understood then that the accident had not been the beginning of anything. It had been the interruption. The first crack wasn't the funeral, or the forged signature, or the messages on my phone. The first crack was that quiet evening in the kitchen, when a man who knew too much tried to hand me the truth carefully, and I chose comfort instead. After the funeral, I didn't return home alone. I hadn't asked for company. I hadn't said I couldn't manage. But when I unlocked the front door, they were already there in spirit, as if the decision had been made somewhere else and simply carried out through me. My husband's sister arrived first. She didn't call ahead. She never did. She stepped inside with purpose, dark coat still on, heels striking the tile in short, confident sounds that echoed through the hallway. You shouldn't be alone tonight, she said, placing her hand on my shoulder. Her grip was firm, almost reassuring, the way authority often disguises itself as care. Not long after, my son-in-law arrived with grocery bags I hadn't requested. He smiled too much, the way people do when they want to appear helpful without being asked. We'll take care of you, Mom, he said. That word Mom sat wrong in my chest. He only used it when he wanted closeness to mean obligation. First it all looked like kindness. That's how control usually begins. Soft voices. Reasonable explanations. A blanket placed around your shoulders so you don't notice your hands being gently moved away from the table. They started with small decisions. Where the funeral paperwork should be placed. Which phone calls I didn't need to answer. What could wait until later? When I reached for the folder from the funeral home, my husband's sister slid it out of my hands without hesitation. You're not in any state to deal with this, she said calmly. We'll handle it. I told myself it was temporary. That grief had made me fragile. That accepting help was sensible. The phone rang constantly, but I rarely knew who was calling. Someone always answered before I could. Messages were summarized for me, filtered and shortened. Nothing important, they said. Or, we've already taken care of it. Tea appeared beside me. A chair was pulled out before I asked. And slowly, without a single argument, my role in my own life began to shrink. That night I slept in fragments. I woke to the sound of murmured conversations in the hallway, voices that stopped the moment I shifted in bed. The refrigerator hummed steadily. The hallway clock ticked too loudly. I held my phone under the blanket and reread the messages from the unknown number. Run. They're watching you. In the darkness, the screen felt like the only thing not lying to me. In the morning, coffee was already made. My blue mug sat on the counter, filled just the way I liked it. Someone remembered that detail. It should have comforted me. Instead, it unsettled me. Care that knows too much often comes with strings. A neat stack of documents waited on the kitchen table. A pen was placed deliberately on top, turned toward my chair. Just formalities, my husband's sister said. We should take care of this while everything is fresh. My son-in-law pulled out the chair. Sit down, Mom. Just sign and we'll lift this burden off you. I picked up the top page. My name was printed clearly above the signature line. My husband's words surfaced without warning. Don't sign anything. Don't trust anyone close to us. Fear didn't arrive as panic. It arrived as clarity. Cold. Precise. I began to notice things I would have missed before. My safe keys had been moved in the drawer. A folder of bank statements was gone from the shelf. Torn envelopes lay buried in the trash beneath coffee grounds. On the calendar, someone had penciled in an appointment for the next morning. No explanation. Just a time. When I tried to call the bank, my son-in-law appeared beside me instantly. I can handle that for you, he said, reaching for my phone. I pulled it back and smiled thinly, saying I would do it myself. For a moment, his expression went flat. That moment told me more than any argument could have. Later, I heard my husband's sister whispering in the hallway. Yes, she's here. No, she hasn't signed yet. She will. She always does. Her voice dropped when the floor creaked beneath my foot. They were discussing me as if I were a task, not a person. That was when I locked the bedroom door for the first time in my own home. I sat on the edge of the bed, coat still on, and unfolded the bank notice I had found at the funeral. The amount. The date. The forged signature. I finally admitted the truth. This wasn't help. It was containment. And whatever was coming next, it had started long before the funeral. I replayed the funeral the way you replay a small mistake, hoping the next time through it will make sense. In my mind, I walked again between the rows of wet umbrellas. I felt the drag of my shoes on the soft ground, the cold seam of my coat sleeve against my wrist, the steady drip of rain from the edge of my hair. I heard the minister's voice blurred by wind, and the low murmur of condolences that landed on me like pebbles, light individually, heavy in a pile. But the detail that returned every time was his eyes. Not the casket. Not the flowers. Not the sound of dirt hitting wood. His eyes. The way he held my gaze as if he were trying to place something in my hands without anyone else seeing. Then the finger to his lips, slow, deliberate, almost gentle. Not a plea. A command. Be quiet. Don't react. Don't give yourself away. At first, I told myself I was hallucinating. Grief does strange things, people said. Your mind looks for what it cannot accept. I tried to believe that version because it was easier than the other one. But my phone had vibrated. The messages were real. The bank notice was real, crumpled and damp inside my pocket like a confession someone had forced me to carry. And the signature at the bottom, my name written in a hand that wanted to mimic mine, was too careful to be an accident. That morning, after I locked my bedroom door, I sat on the floor with my back against the dresser and made myself breathe. In for 4 counts. Out for 4. I did it the way I used to when my daughter was small and sick with a fever and I had to stay calm enough to act. Then I did the first practical thing I could think of. I checked time. The run message had arrived at 2:17 p.m. Exactly 7 minutes after the service began. The second message, "They're watching you," came at 2:18. I stared at those timestamps until they stopped being numbers and started being proof. Whoever texted me had been close enough to see what I saw. Close enough to know I was in danger the second I understood it. I opened my banking app, hand steady now, steadier than they had been at the cemetery. The screen loaded slowly, as if it resented being asked for truth. And there it was again, the withdrawal. $184,600. Pending no longer. Cleared. My stomach didn't flip. It sank, heavy and quiet, like a stone placed in water. I clicked into the transaction details. Location. Time. Method. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough to know it wasn't me. I was at home the day before, answering sympathy calls and signing for casseroles and pretending to be functional. I had not walked into a bank and removed nearly $200,000. Yet the record said I had. I took screenshots. Then I emailed them to myself. Then I printed them because paper feels harder to erase. After that, I went to my husband's office. It was still as he'd left it, as if he might return and complain about the angle of a chair. The air smelled faintly of leather and old ink. His desk drawer stuck on the first pull. And when it finally slid open, my fingers found the locked compartment he had always kept out of sight. I didn't have the key. Of course I didn't. So I did what any woman does when she realizes the rules were never meant to protect her. I stopped obeying them. I found the small metal box where we kept spare keys, behind the flour canister, taped under the shelf. My hands shook only once when the lock turned. Inside were folders, labeled in my husband's neat handwriting. Dates. Names. Account numbers. A thin envelope marked simply, Caroline. I opened it and felt the paper cut the pad of my thumb. One page. A list of instructions. And at the bottom, in a line that made my throat tighten, for words. Trust no one. Not yet. I read the instructions twice, then a third time, as if the page might change if I looked away. Check the joint accounts. Check the house deed. Do not meet anyone alone. If you see me, do not speak. If you are warned, assume it is true. There was also a number written in the margin, no name beside it, just a sequence of digits and a time. After 9 p.m. My hands were so calm by then that it frightened me. I expected tears, hysteria, something. Instead, I felt like a woman taking inventory after a storm, counting what remained, deciding what could be saved. I opened the next folder. It contained copies of emails printed and highlighted. My husband had underlined phrases in red pen. Transfer approval. Temporary power. Signature verification. In the corner of one page was my son-in-law's name. Not in the greeting. In the thread, mentioned casually, as if he were part of a process I had never been invited into. I looked at the dates. Some were months old. A soft knock sounded at the office door. I froze. Caroline, my husband's sister, called. Are you in there? We need those papers. I didn't answer. I held my breath until my ribs ached. The doorknob turned once, stopped, then turned again harder. When it didn't open, she sighed, impatient, not worried, and her footsteps moved away. They weren't checking on me. They were checking on the documents. That was when the funeral image returned like a flash. His face among strangers, his finger to his lips. He had expected this moment. He had expected them to come for me. For the records. For anything that could untie their knots. I gathered the envelope and the folders, slid them into a canvas tote, and pushed the tote under my arm like a schoolgirl stealing library books. Before I left, I glanced through the blinds. A dark sedan sat across the street, engine running, wipers ticking. When I shifted, the headlights blinked once. As if someone had noticed me breathe. Too perfect. Yes. That was when I understood the gesture at the funeral wasn't fear. It was a warning. He wasn't hiding from me. He was hiding for me. I didn't drive straight home. I drove to the only place I could think of that still felt neutral. The 24-hour laundromat on Maple Street. Bright lights. Cameras. People minding their own business. I parked under a lamp, carried my canvas tote inside, and chose a back row of machines that rattled loud enough to swallow my thoughts. I sat on the plastic chair with the folders on my lap and opened them like they were fragile, like they might cut me again. The first thing I checked was the house. Not the photos on the walls. Not the furniture. The deed. In my husband's folder, there was a copy of our title, and beneath it, a limited power of attorney form I had never seen. My name was printed in the signature block. The signature looked like mine if you squinted at it in a hurry, same loops, same slant, but it was wrong in the places only I would notice. Too careful. Too steady. Like someone tracing me. My throat tightened as I read the date. The document had been notarized 2 weeks before the accident. 2 weeks. I turned the page and found the sales contract. The sale of our home. Closing date. The day of the funeral. Sale price. $512,000. My hands went cold around the paper. The buyer wasn't a family. It wasn't even an individual. It was an LLC with a bland name, something like Harbor Ridge Holdings. But in the email printouts, I saw the real connection. My son-in-law had been the contact person, copied on every message, thanked for coordinating signatures. There were wire instructions. There were internal notes. There were lines that said plainly, seller unavailable, PA attached. Unavailable. That was me. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I wiped my eyes with the heel of my hand and kept going. I wasn't going to faint. I wasn't going to make it easy for them by falling apart. Next, I checked the bank documents. The $184,600 withdrawal wasn't a loan. There were smaller pulls the month before. $3,200 here, $1,100 there. Marked as cashier's check. Consulting. Processing fee. The kind of tidy labels that make theft look administrative. I printed the transaction list at the laundromat kiosk, the paper warm as it slid out, and I circled each amount with a pen I'd borrowed from the counter. My husband had been tracking it, too. In red ink, he'd written a single phrase beside one page. This is the pipe. He'd also written something else on a sticky note stuck to the corner of an email. They'll use grief. They'll use love. I thought of the way my husband's sister had held my shoulder, the way my son-in-law had called me Mom. The memory soured in my mouth. I flipped to the envelope marked Caroline again and read the last line with new understanding. If you are warned, assume it is true. That night after 9, I used the number in the margin. The voice on the other end was a man's, low and controlled. He didn't say his name. He didn't ask mine. He simply asked, "Are you alone?" "No," I whispered, though I was alone in the laundromat, surrounded by strangers and spinning clothes. "But I'm not unsafe here." A pause. Then, "Your husband contacted me because he found a scheme. It involved accounts, a shell company, and forged authorizations. He believed family members were participating or being used. He staged his disappearance to stop it and to keep you from being forced into signing more." My stomach clenched as if my body finally caught up to what my mind already knew. He staged his death? He made it look like one, the man said. He needed time. He needed them to move, to show their hands. And he needed you to stay alive long enough to see the truth. I looked down at the contract with the funeral date and felt something inside me break cleanly, like a thread being cut with scissors. They weren't just stealing money. They were dividing my life while I was standing over a closed casket. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I folded every page, slid it back into the folder, and zipped the tote like I was sealing evidence. Then I opened my phone and one by one, I changed every password I could remember. Banking, email, utilities. I turned on two-factor authentication with shaking fingers that refused to stop working. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't brave in the way movies show it. I was simply finished being managed. On my way out, I glanced through the glass doors. The dark sedan was still there across the street idling. And in the reflection of the laundromat lights, I saw myself clearly for the first time since the accident. A woman who had been placed in the way, because I was the obstacle between them and everything my husband had built. Now I understood why he'd warned me. And I understood what the run message really meant. Not panic. Procedure. I went deeper into the house file and found another betrayal. An insurance change of beneficiary form. My husband's signature was real this time, but the beneficiary line had been replaced so his sister's name sat where mine should have been. Beside it was a sloppy C.M. Initial, someone's attempt at my hand. At the back of the folder my husband had stapled a yellow pad page with a short list of meetings. Title office, bank manager, notary. Under the first line he'd written, SL plus son-in-law. It wasn't one bad moment. It was a plan. From the laundromat, I called the fraud number printed on my card and asked for a hold. No withdrawals, no cashier's checks, no changes without my direct confirmation. When the representative asked, "Do you have a power of attorney on file?" I said, Yes, and it's forged. Her tone shifted into procedure. She gave me a case number, and I wrote it on the inside of my wrist. They wanted my signature because my signature was the key. They wanted my grief because grief is a leash. Not anymore. I didn't need revenge. I needed distance, documentation, and one clean step at a time. Tonight, when the truth finally began to surface, it didn't arrive with drama or shouting. It arrived the way real consequences usually do, through locked doors, unanswered calls, and systems that don't bend just because someone is used to being in charge. The first shift happened quietly. Accounts were frozen. Transfers stalled. Payments that had been scheduled with confidence simply failed. Somewhere, a card was declined at a counter. Somewhere else, a call ended with the words, "I'm sorry, but we can't authorize that." My son-in-law called me that afternoon. I watched his name light up my phone and let it ring until it stopped. Then came a text. "Mom, there's been a misunderstanding. We need to talk." I didn't reply. I had learned that responding too quickly only fed the belief that I could still be managed. 2 days later, the sale of my house collapsed. The title office flagged the forged authorization, and the buyer withdrew immediately. The company that had been so eager to take possession suddenly wanted nothing to do with the transaction. What had been treated as routine was now evidence. My husband's sister arrived at my door on the third day. She looked smaller than I remembered, her confidence leaking out through tight shoulders and red eyes. She didn't wait for an invitation. She never had. "I was only trying to protect the family," she said once we were inside. "You know how complicated things were. He didn't trust anyone. He put us all in impossible positions." She cried then. Loudly. The kind of crying meant to erase responsibility. I listened without interrupting, my hands folded in my lap. When she finished, I told her she should speak to a lawyer and not come back to my home again. I opened the door while she was still explaining herself. My daughter called that night. Her voice was strained, caught between loyalty and fear. "Mom," she said carefully, "maybe it's gone far enough. Maybe you should let it go. We're still family." I told her I wasn't the one who took it this far. I told her family doesn't use forged signatures or closed caskets to gain control. There was silence on the line, long and heavy. She said she needed time. I told her I would be here when she was ready. Rumors followed, as they always do. Stories where I was confused, overwhelmed, manipulated by outsiders. I didn't correct them. I didn't defend myself. Paperwork doesn't need explanations, and I had plenty of that. Questions began arriving from places they couldn't charm. Banks. Title offices. Investigators who asked for dates instead of apologies. Each question tightened the space they had to move. My son-in-law asked for one final meeting. I agreed on my terms in a public place. He arrived confident and left pale. I didn't threaten him. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told him the process had already started and I would not interfere with it. They lost money first. Then credibility. Then the ability to decide things without consequences. I didn't celebrate any of it. I sat at my kitchen table afterward, holding the same blue mug I'd used for years, and felt something steady return to me. Not joy. Not vengeance. Balance. For the first time, the weight was no longer all on my side. When everything finally slowed down, when the phone stopped ringing and no one knocked on my door pretending concern, I understood something with a clarity that surprised me. Staying would keep me tied to the damage, so I didn't stay. I sold what remained of the house properly this time, with my own attorney, my own meetings, my own pen in my own hand. I read every line. I asked every question. No one rushed me. No one sighed when I took too long. When I signed, it felt different, not like giving something away, but like closing a door carefully so it wouldn't swing open again. I kept what mattered. Not everything. Just enough. Clothes that still felt like my skin. Old photo albums that smelled faintly of dust and glue. A small wooden box with letters written before life became complicated. And the blue mug with the chipped rim, the one constant through years of mornings. I wrapped it myself and carried it with me instead of packing it in a box. I wasn't ready to trust it to anyone else. I moved to a smaller place near the coast. Nothing dramatic. A quiet building. White walls. Windows that let in more light than memory. In the mornings, the air smelled like salt and wet stone. At night there was no traffic noise, only wind and the distant rhythm of water I couldn't see but knew was there. No one there knew who I had been before. No one used my name with expectation attached to it. I wasn't someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's responsibility. I was just a woman buying bread, learning which streets flooded when it rained, finding the best bench to sit on with a cup of coffee. I built a rhythm slowly, the way you test ice before stepping fully onto it. Early walks, coffee at the same hour, groceries bought in small amounts so nothing spoiled before I used it. Twice a week, I volunteered at the local library, shelving books, repairing spines, recommending quiet novels to people who still believed in reading for comfort instead of speed. For the first time in years, no one controlled my schedule. No one answered my phone for me. No one told me I was not ready to handle something. If I felt tired, I rested. If I felt curious, I followed it. I noticed changes in my body before I noticed them in my mind. My shoulders lowered. My jaw unclenched. I slept through the night without waking to imagine footsteps. When my phone vibrated, my heart no longer leapt ahead of my thoughts. I understood then how much energy I had spent being braced, always prepared to adjust, to explain, to soften myself so others would feel comfortable. My husband never contacted me again. That was part of the plan. His disappearance was permanent, even if his death had not been. I grieved him properly this time. Not the man in the casket, but the man who had loved me enough to step out of my life to protect it. Some days were still heavy. Grief doesn't disappear because truth arrives. It simply changes shape. But it no longer ruled me. It no longer made me pliable. I stopped explaining myself. When my daughter eventually visited, we spoke carefully, like people rebuilding something fragile without pretending it had never broken. There were no grand apologies that erased the past. Only honesty. Only patience. Only the understanding that trust, once damaged, returns slowly or not at all. I sleep with the windows open now. I let air move through my rooms. I let light wake me instead of alarms. I trust the quiet instead of fearing it. This life is smaller than the one I had before. But it is calm. It is deliberate. It is entirely mine. And for the first time, that feels like enough. Sometimes I think about how quietly everything happened. No explosions. No shouting. No single moment where I could point and say, this is when my life broke open. Instead, it was a series of small permissions I gave without realizing I was giving them. Small silences. Small compromises. Small decisions to trust when my instincts asked me not to. The deepest betrayal wasn't only what they did to me. It was how long I believed my role was to endure it gracefully. I stood at my husband's funeral and looked into the eyes of a man the world believed was gone. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I listened. That moment didn't destroy me. Corrected me. I understand now that love without boundaries is not devotion. It is vulnerability waiting to be used. And grief does not excuse those who choose to take instead of protect. I don't hate them. Hate would keep me connected. I simply no longer make room for people who require my silence to feel powerful. The woman I am now is quieter than before, but she is not smaller. She asks questions. She reads the fine print. She locks doors without apologizing. She leaves rooms where her presence is treated like permission. I still drink my coffee from the same blue mug. I still pause at windows. I still miss the man I married. But I no longer miss the woman who stayed silent to keep the peace. She did her best with what she knew. I do better now because I know more. If this story touched something in you, if it stirred a memory or a question you've been avoiding, you are not alone. Silence breaks more easily than we're taught to believe. Subscribe to hear the stories that begin where silence ends. Some endings look like loss. Others look like freedom finally spoken aloud.